Good
I
morning
think.
or afternoon.
Good morning. Good morning.
I, I
Dang it.
I hope that the technology won't be a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should have a cup in your hand and do this.
Yeah. That's what I need. But
Do
I
you-
need one hand to hold the phone because it just doesn't do it. Yeah.
Happy April 1st to you. Happy April Fool's Day. Do you plan any
Happy April 1st to you.
early celebrations for April 1st, or is that something you just completely ignore?
I've never really gotten into that. I don't know that it's too much of a thing here in Italy.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. At least locally.
yeah.
Those kind of customs vary so greatly.
Yeah.
Locale to locale.
It's never been a thing for me. My family was always looking for things to celebrate and have fun with, and so there was a time
Hmm.
when I think my parents and maybe my sister got into posting funny drawings in places or um, taping things onto the backs of people or something like that. But I never really found it to be a holiday I really necessarily wanted to celebrate. Uh,
Yeah.
there was some sort of tradition of giving people a fish on April 1st, which is an odd tradition. But
You know, I wonder what that is. I don't know anything about that, but somebody alluded to that in the street today here. Now that I'm piecing together a comment that made absolutely no sense in the context
well, if
to me,
think here,
because
I know
they're
why
Italian.
April 1st is April Fool's Day. I know that. It's because of the shift in calendars. When we shifted the calendar to our current one, which is what is it? Is ours the Julian calendar? Is that the title for it?
The new Gregorian
Gregorian.
calendar
Okay, so the
is the
Gregorian.
standard.
So it's the Julian to the Gregorian. When they shifted the Julian to the Gregorian, they put the new year at January 1st. But it used to be that the new year was right after the vernal equinox, right after the spring equinox, that the year would begin.
Sure.
And that's why Easter
Yeah, March.
thing, Easter fell at that.
In fact,
The
yeah.
old Europeans, the old Catholics, used to celebrate the new year right about now, April 1st. And
Right.
when the new calendar kicked in, there's this big shift to try and push everybody into that mode. And people that clung to it were ridiculed and called fools because they clung to the old calendar. Um, and that's why,
Sure.
if I remember right, there's a celebration which includes a fake pope, like you have an effigy of the pope, or you have a guy who actually is the fake pope, who would be part of the fools celebration.
Hmm.
And yeah, it along with all those other festivals of like maypole dancing and that kind of business that dealt with the return of the sun and the crops and all that jazz. So I suppose that's maybe, if that's the case, a fish would come in handy in season, at least one. As I was saying before we were so rudely interrupted.
We were. Yeah. Well, that makes sense of the New Year because that's something that I just learned here is that in Florence and in much of Tuscany, they had the March 25th is the New Year.
Oh,
So not far from here. This we were on one side of the divide that had adopted the Gregorian calendar earlier here in Orvieto, but not far. I mean, I can from what I can see from the side of the city up towards Monte Amiata and Florence, they used to celebrate the New Year well until the time of goodness, when Francis of Lorraine became consort emperor of the Holy of Austria and
okay.
inherited the duchy, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, he imposed the new Gregorian calendar New Year. They'd been on the Gregorian calendar, I think, perhaps, but not the new year situation being January 1.
Huh. Okay. So are there still what are they called, vestiges of the old celebrations that occur in parts?
I understand that there is. It's a different. I mean, for most of history, it was an entirely different country up there. So
Sure.
I'm not sure
German.
nowadays what they do. My understanding was just some little bit of research and asking around locally is that in Florence and Pisa and other places like that, they still do some sort of celebration on, at the big intervals, at the 2000 or 2010, maybe they did something, that kind of thing. I don't know with what regularity they do that though. I'm sure it varies from city to city, town to town.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that used to be the new year in many Italian countries, city states.
I did not.
well into the 1700s.
There's a lot of history that, of course, you fill in as you get older, and you don't really know out of textbooks or out of school.
Hmm.
I did not know, for instance, that Christmas was not a thing until St. Francis. I only found out
Sure.
last week. I did not know that. I thought Christmas was celebrated on a par with Easter in the Christian church. Apparently not.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's some of those things you discover later on, and that is interesting because it was around that time of Saint Francis in the Roman Church, in the Church in the West, where it really started to become a thing. Of course, the nativity scene, Francis
Yeah,
himself
right,
invented,
right, right.
but even just as a celebration, it was there. It was one of the high holidays, but it wasn't like Pentecost, Easter, or Epiphany.
Yeah,
Epiphany was the bigger deal, and still is in the
yeah,
Eastern churches.
right. And that celebration of Christmas by that Francis exalted starts to show up in literature right around that mark between the 1200s and 1300s. I mean, like the first time
Hmm.
you see it as a really big deal is in Gowan and the Green Knight there in the early 1300s.
Right, right.
And even there,
Yeah.
it's a big deal partly because it's a big deal and Epiphany's a big deal. So it's almost like we're this way right now.
Right. Yeah, it starts to kind of level up to Epiphany
Yeah,
and then surmounts it.
I mean, I gotta admit, my ignorance knows no bounds, Cameron. There are things I'm like, I really should have learned that.
There's a lot of things we find in
Yeah,
life that way, right?
I just, I kick myself. I think I probably was chasing skirts or something at the time, and so didn't have time for all that, you know, history mumbo jumbo. Um, but
Also, the man didn't want you to know,
the man,
too.
that's true.
The man did not want you to know.
Yeah, and now I'm the man.
Right.
No, I tell you, it's interesting to find things out like this. St. Francis effect on the way that we see ourselves as Westerners is truly stunning too. I did it.
The way we see it. Go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
no, I just did a little bit of legwork on him for a class last week, and I was just kind of wow,
Oh, yeah.
stunning how he changed the way he created a sort of, or he heightened, I should say, a paradox in the church between the life of simple living and the life of worldly power.
Hmm.
Paradoxical, because of course worldly power has to exist and people have to wield it. But on the other hand, that's not exactly what Christ was proclaiming. So how do you
Hmm.
how do you merge these two things? Uh,
Right.
so anyway,
Very interesting.
fascinating character. Well, we should probably move to talk a little bit about the Hobbit. When we were going to
At
meet for
some point.
Christmas, we didn't meet last weekend, but
Right.
I was going to point out, not only was it the feast of the Annunciation, right, on Friday, but it was also the
Hmm.
feast for Tolkien fans of the day that the ring went into the fire. So
Right.
we're in Gondorian New Year, day 7 now, I think. Day 7?
Being the 1st of April in the common reckoning.
Right, exactly.
That would put us, yeah, that should be right. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30,
So
31, 30. So 1 would be day 8.
day 8, okay.
It's the 8th day.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right, good. So I guess last time we were going to meet, I was just going to point out this amazing thing that Tolkien does, which is that he
Hmm.
creates this secondary world. You could immerse yourself in that world. I know people have done so to learn Sindarin, to learn Dwarvish,
Hmm.
to learn the lore and the mythology, and think of it almost like it was, I don't know, I don't want to say real, as though it were contemporaneous with our own human history on this planet. That's to me quite stunning the way he did that. I have not gone that far into the Hobbit hole, so like rabbit hole. I've not far into the Hobbit hole, but
Yeah.
is tempting. It's tempting. You think about, like we were just talking about, the shift in calendars and
Hmm.
daylight savings time, and having to deal now with the mechanical universe that's been foisted upon everybody. And there's something
Right.
in you that just you like. I just long for a world where it's more like the Shire. It's a world more based upon the Gondorian year.
Right. And especially because a lot of this stuff was foisted upon the people at the behest of the industrialists, the technocrats
Yeah.
that had only recently taken power. They didn't have a vested interest in the good of the people. They had an ideology that drove them,
Yes. And that,
you know?
you're absolutely right. And ideology changed, yeah, changed the way that we dealt with our other fellow man.
Right. I mean, we didn't need time zones until you had trains
Yes.
and you had to coordinate
Yep.
within a certain band when the train was going to be, so you'd be on time. You didn't have that daylight savings time until really recently. I mean, this last century, well into this last century, daylight savings time introduced.
Yeah.
But even the Gregorian calendar and the move, and even after the Gregorian, I mean, when was the Gregorian calendar was only adopted in England in like what, the
Yeah.
1750s or something like that.
Much.
Like it was not like everybody woke up one day around the world and decided we're going to switch the calendar. And of course, obviously,
Which
in Central Eastern Europe, they still don't follow it.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, they don't. Okay. That's interesting. They still don't follow it.
Yeah, so they're on the Julian calendar for the at least most of the Eastern Christians are on the Julian calendar. Most of the Eastern Christians in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, follow the Julian calendar for the determination of non-fixed feasts. But because of the, sort of more global civilization that we've had evolve over the last century, they adopted the Gregorian reckoning for many fixed feasts, but Easter is still on a different date precisely because they use the Julian calendar.
Ah, that explains it. I see. I see. Okay. Okay. I've always wondered about that. The things you don't know. So, why did, I mean, I know that the French, after the Revolution in 1789, tried to reboot everything, including year.
We have a 10-day week and
Yeah, right.
10-hour day, yeah.
It's all going to be based on reason and logic. It did
Right.
quite
It didn't work. That
But-
was going too far, but in terms of, I think those changes were too radical, but they still imposed, and others of that ideology on a more Menshevist kind of attitude still impose these kinds of changes, just not as radical of a shift to like a 10-month year or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, all of even our weekly calendar has the history to it. The getting of the 2-day weekend and all that, and late.
Which has put the shift of Sunday to be the last day of the week,
Right.
which is still very politically felt here in Italy, for example. If Sunday's at the last day of the week in your calendar, that's a statement that you're making versus if it's on the first day of the week.
Sure. Wow.
Nobody wants to get into fisticuffs over it, but people will state their opinions strongly about where Sunday belongs.
Yeah. No, and I know that there are Orthodox friends of mine who state very strongly about the necessity of putting Easter where it is too, like you mentioned. Wow,
Yeah.
that's intriguing to find out that things that you take as a sort of normal, as an everyday, they're fraught with history and to some degree a political.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
I've often wondered why it was that the Enlightenment rationalists, why they didn't make a bigger push to shift the calendar globally, why they didn't try to do that. Because of course, in terms of an industrial thing, it would have made sense to have a 6-day work week and only 1 day off at the most. But I don't know. I'm glad they didn't. This is a conversation. It touches on a conversation I was having with my daughter just the other day. She was very patient with me and lets me wax philosophical, which is grand. But my 24-year-old daughter is a very intriguing, intelligent young lady. So we were talking about the shift that occurred in the Logos, which I'm perceiving too. I just saw, and we're seeing it even now happening, I think, in our own generation. I watched a movie called The Wave with Justin Long, which I don't recommend. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it, but it's not one that I would say, hey, go out and watch this. But the long and the short of it is that the movie was touting how the universe provides. The universe has a design for you, and you have to fit into what the universe wants you to do.
Okay.
Which is really a return to a sort of pagan mentality of the gods or karma. It's that fata that the Latins held to. You don't really have a choice or free will. You simply have the choice to accept or reject what you already are going to be forced to do. And that brought up this conversation about the Logos, because from what I can tell in the old form of the Logos, there was this brilliant pattern of the Logos, and everything was governed by it. The universe was governed by it. But the Logos doesn't care for you and I. The Logos doesn't, we are simply a point on that Logos. And so our individual choices and our individual lives or happiness are absolutely superfluous. And what happened is that it got baptized. And that's what's startling to me. One of the many things that's so startling to me about Christianity is that Christianity baptizes the Logos. It makes it into, well, it proclaims, I should say, it proclaims that the Logos is a conscious being, that itself is the manifestation of the Godhead, that has care for us, and loves us, and
in effect became one of us.
Became one of us, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that makes a huge, huge difference. But what I think we're seeing in our modern era with the collapse of Christianity is a return to that older form of the Logos, the universe, right? It's just another word. The universe, in this case, has a design. It seeks equilibrium in a sort of physics kind of way, of entropy, you could call it. But because it does so, you and I get pushed towards a destiny that we don't choose. We only choose to accept it and therefore be a little bit more peaceful in almost a Buddhist way, or to reject it and become sort of monstrous and filled with angst. I've seen this in numerous movies, and I've heard it from various people who say things like the universe provides. And so it's cropping up, I think, a lot more now than it was before. I won't say that it's a bad thing, because in the sense that it's not as bad as just saying the world's a machine, or that the world is nothing, meaningless. Because at least meaning,
right.
It's just not the kind of meaning that I think is the best kind of meaning for human beings.
Right, because that becomes, and it's a little different from the Buddhist thing, because the Buddhist thing, there isn't a mind, there isn't a world soul that's governing things like there's for the Stoic. And Buddhist principle number one is all life is suffering. Right? There's a thing, and it's like entropy, but it's not like a benevolent will that's going to provide for you or has a plan for your life.
Right.
Yeah, there's an element of kind of that, a rebirth of the Stoic ideal, and that's actually becoming a very popular religion now in the West, as they react to the workaholism and sort of frenetic stuff of modern materialist consumerism. They're swinging towards a Stoic mentality. There's a very fastly growing sect as a religious movement that way. But one of the things I was just teaching to some grad students, actually this last week I taught Frankenstein, but the week before that we taught Faust, Goethe's Faust. And what struck me reading that this time again is, and he's writing it, this is the cusp of the new modernity, right? The real birth of the modern world in its full splendor, in its full technocratic splendor. That 1700s to 1800s changeover, and the character of Faust himself, his downfall right before he makes that bargain with the devil, right, with Mephistopheles, pops up, his little black puppy dog turns into the demon, he summons the demon spirit. Right before he's doing that, he sits down to translate the Gospel of John into German, and Goethe has him sit down and do this, and he's going to write, and he gets, in the beginning was the Logos, Energie en ho Logos. And Faust is sitting there, for those who aren't familiar with this passage, Faust is sitting there, and he's going to translate this into German. He says, Logos is word. I don't like that. I'm sick of that. I don't like this whole Logos being the word and the word becoming flesh. I want Logos to mean something else. Because, of course, Logos can be translated in a lot of different ways, depending on nuance and context, into English and German, for example, from the original Greek. And he says, in the beginning was meaning. How about that? Meaning. The meaning, the essence of a thing. That's too ephemeral. In the beginning was mind. He said, but his mind, that's better. That's better because he's, an alchemist and he's intellectual and he wants to know all these things. He says, but is that really powerful enough to drive all things, to be the undergirding principle of all that is? Mind? No. In the beginning was, and the word that he uses in German is like the act of doing, right? So this action. In the beginning was action. In the beginning was deed, was doing, was seizing control and putting it into action. He says, "Yeah, that's what I'll do."
Hmm.
And the little black demonic puppy dog kind of, sparks up a little bit, and then so that's this turning point, the internal point. If Faust is like a modern person, is like the modern world, it's a turning point of the logos from being the Christian notion of the word become flesh to doing action makes us stronger, must keep going.
Ah, that's really interesting. And it's not a small step from there to Arbeit macht frei, is it?
Exactly.
Huh.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between the Shire and the world of, even if we flesh it out, the full legendarium of Tolkien, you've got the Valar are involved, and there's
Yeah.
but there's a cosmic order to things versus, and that exists, but we see the goblins living in a world that's much more like the latter.
Oh yeah. Oh no, definitely. And even my example that came to mind when you mentioned that is Sharky coming back to the Shire at the end of the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
when we were talking about the difference between Gandalf and Radagast and Saruman, okay, and
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf is studying the ring. That's his auspice, and he knows a great deal of other things, but it's the ring he focuses on. Radagast's focus is on living things, and he doesn't just know squirrels and bunny rabbits like Peter Jackson things. He knows,
Right.
he knows the lore of birds and of trees and of ents and of elves and all these. He knows the lore of every living thing.
Right.
Saruman, he knows Sauron. That's his auspice. He's supposed to study Sauron. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of his downfall because he begins to think that Sauron is right. And what is Sauron saying? Arbeit macht frei. So when Saruman goes back to the Shire, Saruman, not Sauron. When Saruman goes back to the Shire, he tries to impose not just a little Mordor, but he tries to impose a world where you will work and be productive. Right? You will work and be productive. And I can make things work better, like that crummy old picturesque,
Right.
Right.
Get rid of the mill. We're going to put in a modern, steel factory.
That's right. That's right. A dark satanic mill, right? As William Blake pointed out.
Yes.
That's so interesting. It's funny to think about Tolkien even dealing with this very thing, because no doubt he read Goethe, no doubt he read Faust.
Oh yeah.
He was very well read in numerous. I don't know whether he read Frankenstein or not, but I know he read Goethe. And so he's commenting on it, and he's seeing it around him. And we don't often take into account the fact that these great works, like The Lord of the Rings, are written in a context. They're written in historical context. And here's the thought that I've been entertaining for some time, Cameron. Tell me what you think of this. Yes, we can interpret it as a psychological story. Yes, we can interpret it as a great adventure story. But is Tolkien also writing into his story a critique of, dare I say it, the Illuminati, a critique of the...
We have no problem saying that in Italy. That's the word for the Enlightenment.
Is that right?
There's no word for Enlightenment thinkers. In Italian, literally translates into gli Illuminati. Illuminismo is the Enlightenment line of thought. That's just the Latinate word for it.
That's why I love the Italians.
Tell it like it is.
And I mean, in America, it's like, don't say that word.
You sound like a crazy person.
Yeah, you sound like a nutball. Sister says she thinks it's a cursed word in America because they've used so much of advertising and media to make people who mention this word sound like nutters. So we're conditioned. Even good Christians are conditioned to think that you're a nutball if you bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
That's real. So okay, so the Illuminati.
Yeah.
And what do you think? Do you think that holds water with Tolkien's work?
I do. I think, and I will provide the justification momentarily as I scroll on my other. I'm going to put this computer to work for me, even if I have to use my phone for the video call. Let us see here. In the essay on fairy stories.
Yeah.
Where is this here? And I might not be able to find it precisely, but I will try. Well, in any case, where he's talking about this, just a side point about if I had the physical book in front of me with On Fairy Stories, I'd find it like that. But I've got to use this digital device, and it doesn't map onto your mind in
Okay.
the same way as a physical book does. That's why it's easier to find something in the real world.
I know.
But in any case, where he talks about the role of fantasy, so what is his whole project as an author?
Right.
Is to write escapist literature, but he says it's not escapist in the sense of, taking drugs and like checking out the world, right? It's not like Billy Joel's song, "The Piano Man," that they know that it's me I've been coming to see to forget about life for a while. It's not that kind of escape, but it's like slipping a map to a prisoner. It says, here's the way out. Here's what it looks like on the outside. And he writes very explicitly somewhere in the essay On Fairy Stories about the machines and the cars that are coming in and driving faster and driving through the university town, about the electric lampposts, which are far less magical than the real world. And he says that if there's something that's escapist, maybe that's because there's something we need to escape from.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want to escape from this world? I remember him saying that. And by the way, I did a cheat. I just went to quick search instead of the actual document. So here's what I get from Good.
Yeah.
So this is just the first hit I got, and maybe this.
Yes.
Why should a man be scorned, says Tolkien, if finding himself in prison he tries to get out and go home? Or
thank you. There you go.
So he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls. The world outside has not become less real because the prisoner cannot see it.
Mm-hmm.
In using escape in this way, the critics have chosen the wrong word. And what is more, they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter.
Right.
Just so a party spokesman might have labeled departure from the misery of the Führer or any other Reich, and even criticism of it, as treachery. Not only do they confound the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter, but they would seem to prefer the acquiescence of the quisling to the resistance of the patriot.
Right. That right there. That's that.
Yeah. Tolkien with the smackdown again,
Right.
It's like that time that he smacked Hitler down with that Nazi letter.
Unfortunately, I don't have any of that race in my blood,
He read
yeah.
the letter?
That's great.
Gosh, the man should be a saint. Seriously.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, Tolkien. There are so many reasons for me to love him and his works. He's one of those guys where, Mr. Tolkien, can I buy you 5 beers? And we just sit and talk.
Yeah.
I just love that.
Yeah.
Of course, I would be like, along with 5 billion other people that want to do that. But he has the tower with the eye at the top, right? The pyramid with the eye at the top.
Yeah.
He's got the imagery of the internet, which I know he didn't know about, but he certainly knew about mass media and the use of mass media. The imagery of the circle at Orthanc, the circle with the line through it, the phi symbol.
Yeah.
He's got all these different images that seem to point to a struggle between not just good and evil, as a sort of universal good and evil, but a struggle between people that want to live in a pre-industrial world and people that want to live in this post-enlightenment, I don't know.
The Illuminist world.
Yeah, right. The Illuminist world, right. Yeah. So that being in the back of my mind, that's one of the reasons why I love reading his works.
And that's, if I may make the transition, I think particularly apropos to this chapter, out of the frying pan and into the fire.
That's interesting. Why is that? Why would you say that?
Because Bilbo just escaped from the bowels under the mountain, the bowels of darkness. He just escaped from the golem. He just got past the orcs and out into the daylight. He just came out of the cave. And we can look at that as a deserter or an escapee, right? He's a prisoner of his own device, perhaps. He's a prisoner of these dark forces, and he escapes.
Yeah, I see your point.
And they pursue him, and everybody still else has to. You have to make a further escape. And just to give a brief synopsis of the chapter, they don't succeed. They don't escape. They get rescued from above.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Very good point. Yes. Yes. Let's hold on to that for just a second, because you said some
Yeah.
chapter, and I'm neglecting my duties here as host, because if you are listening to this on a podcast, or if you're watching this for the first time, I assume you've read The Hobbit, but if you haven't read The Hobbit, this is chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. Bilbo escapes from the Misty Mountains after the goblins have captured him and the dwarves, and he escapes from having talked to Gollum, and he's gotten the ring, and he gets out, and then they flee down the mountain, but they come to a glade where at night, where they are trapped by wolves in these trees, and they climb up the trees to escape the wolves, but then the goblins come and they set fire to the trees, and they begin to burn alive the dwarves and the Hobbit, and Gandalf as well. Gandalf is not going to escape. And at the last minute, they're ready to die, and the eagles come and save them and take them away to their own areas up in the mountains, these ledges where the eagles live. And that's where the chapter ends. So that's a quick synopsis of the whole chapter. Right, yeah. So back to your point, I like this idea that he is like the prisoner escaping. But there's another point to it that I've wondered about with Tolkien, and maybe I just wonder because we've always done this as humans. High places are freedom. Low, deep places are imprisonment.
Right.
Right? And we see that over and over and over again. Everything from the valley of the shadow of death.
Right.
Which, by the way, I deplore the modern translation, but there's a lot of modern things I deplore. I think the modern translation is an obfuscation of the real meaning. They say something to the effect of, the worst I've heard is, yes, though I walk through the low place of darkness, I will fear no evil. Low place of darkness? Pardon me, but what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Not just that it has no poetic ring, but
It's a very different meaning.
It doesn't have meaning. I mean, the meaning is completely stripped of the thing. It's not just watered down soup. It's just water, and not even that. No, when you talk about the valley of the shadow of death, you're talking about a specific thing, and you do and that imagery of the Mount Ararat or the Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments versus the Valley of the Shadow of Death, that carries over even into modern parlance. We were watching the movie Dune just the other night. Again, this is a number 4.
Yeah.
No, number 5 viewing for me. And what does Villeneuve do in the Dune movie? Evil things are dark and shadowy and low.
Right.
And brilliant things are bright and filled with light and high up. So even, and of course, nobody's like, that's wrong. Dark things should be good. No, you see the movie, you're like, oh, I get it. Now the question would be why? Why is that? What is it about us that's the thing for us? And I don't have an answer necessarily. I know from my own personal experience that when I'm feeling down and when I'm feeling, listen to the words I'm using. When I feel down and I feel low and I feel dark, that the best cure is to go out and try to be in a high place and to see the sky. We've had 8 days of gray, for instance, and now today's the first sunny day, and it makes all the world a difference. It makes it tremendous.
Yeah.
So I know from my own, and that may be completely subjective, maybe completely my own experience, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be as human beings, we have this natural trend towards the
right. Yeah.
So that being the case, he gets to a very high place, so high he's clinging to the leg of the dwarf, terrified.
And he's stuck there. He gets placed on this high ledge. He's brought up by the eagles, and when you come to that high place, he can feel like a prison.
Yeah, right.
Which that's it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, he's also afraid at that point that he's going to be eaten because they see him as a rabbit and talk to him as a rabbit.
Right. And he's an eagle, and there's eagles.
Rabbits,
so
well, they don't play together well. But that does bring up two eagles and rabbits. That does bring up that Norse mythology that he's drawing from here, because Norse mythology again, Yggdrasil, the world tree, there is serpent at the root. The Nidog at the root, dark, gnawing at the roots. But then at the top, you've got an unnamed eagle, which I've heard sometimes referred to as othar. I forget how you pronounce it. Otter.
Okay.
But anyway, the point being, there's an eagle, and
Yeah,
there's a squirrel that runs between the eagle and the serpent,
that's right.
and
The gossip squirrel.
exactly. And
Yeah,
he makes trouble between the two all the time.
yeah.
And so he's kind of playing off that. He's got the eagle. He's got the wolf serpents down below with the heads of orcs, and in between he's got this Ratatosk, Bilbo, who's trapped.
Yeah,
Can't get out of the world.
yeah.
It's just, wow, what a great image. What a fantastic thing. Um, I did a little bit of legwork to find out about the wolves and eagles too, because that fascinated me. And one of the things that I found was that the name for wolf in Old English is actually warg. Let's see if I can
Okay.
quick.
So as we're talking, calls these wolves wargs.
Yeah,
He's not making a word up. He's just giving the ancient English word for it.
this is right. This is right out of his
Where?
Tolkien-ish knowledge, if I can use that term. Here it is. This is the Bosworth Toller Germanic Dictionary, Werg, and I'll later make a very clever graphic right here. But basically, Werg means evil or vile or malignant or accursed of human beings. So if you are Werg, you are cursed. And I think it's related to the word beware or aware or wary. You know, that
Right.
be wary of something is because it's evil or vile or cursed. But the word that he's probably referring to, if I can find that one too,
Okay.
actually, can I get this? Come on. Here it is. This is the, it's like the bane of heroes or the evil of heroes. And the word is herowerg. So hero werg, cursed hero, or the curse of heroes. Herowerg. So when he takes the wergs, the wargs, the wolves, he's using not only an Old English word, werg, meaning evil or cursed, he's using what's called a kenning in Old English. Because you don't say wolf, wolf, you say the bane of heroes, right? That's
right. Hero's Bane.
Hero's Bane. Right, exactly.
Right. Well, they were out on the whale road.
Exactly.
Instead of in the sea.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Sharp cutter. Herowerg. So warg, a warg is an evil curse thing, but it's shortened for herowerg, the bane of heroes. I thought that was kind of cool, but it did raise a question: why are wolves still in our consciousness considered to be the bane, the herowergs, even despite all that the protect our planet people are trying to do to make us love wolves? You know, wolves are people too, and they're delightful, and we should love them. Why do we still have in our consciousness this deep-seated fear of wolves? That's a powerful question. Did you ever see the movie The Gray? With
No.
Right? Highly recommend that one. That would be a good manly movie to watch. The wolves in there are not nice wolves. They're wolves that pursue Liam Neeson. You know, Liam Neeson is, I'm going to kill you and talk to you later, you know, that kind of guy.
Right.
But even Liam Neeson is a match for these terrifying creatures that pursue him through Alaska. And I can't help but think that there's something in us as humans where for many, many years we were pursued by very large hordes of wolves that we didn't have a defense against, you know.
Right.
Something again, please go ahead. Something again, in our pre-industrial mind, we did not have streets that were lighted. We did not have worlds that we could retreat to easily. You know, now when you get stranded on a highway, you go to the local Piggly Wiggly or to a Holiday Inn or whatever, and you get yourself a room or whatever it is, you know, or you call a cop on your phone or whatever. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have Piggly Wigglies. They didn't have Holiday Inns. If you got stranded out between one civilized area and the other, and you got stranded out at night, you know, that was terribly dangerous. Not only pitch black, but there are things out there in the wolves, herowergs.
Right.
It must have been that and before we had hunted everything to extinction, tongue-in-cheek, there were large hordes of creatures on this planet, like the buffalo in America or the elk there in Norway. And
Right.
they would traverse the countryside. So I have heard tell of these wolf hordes in the north, even in Roman times, that were quite vast, upwards of 30 or 40 members in a pack.
Wow.
And if you're a lone traveler at night and a 30 or 40 pack wolf horde comes at you, you kiss it.
That's it.
That's it. You're done. The universe provides.
It's just who it's providing what
Yeah,
for.
that's right. It provides the wolves with yet another meal. There's
Another hairless monkey cut out at night.
Yeah, right. There's a great passage in Willa Cather's book, My Antonia, which has stuck with me since I first read this passage. Can I bore you for just a sec with this?
Please do.
Have you read My Antonia by Willa Cather?
I have not.
Okay.
No, I'm familiar with the plot, but I don't know.
Yeah, great story. Put it on your reading list, I'm sure, which is a mile long. But this is a story that these two characters that the main character knows on the plains out there in the Midwest, they were immigrants from Russia, and they tell this story. And they're at this wedding party where they were supposed to drive the bride and groom back from the wedding, okay? And it says, the party set out with singing and the jingle of sleigh bells, the groom's sledge going first. All the drivers were more or less the worse for merrymaking, and the groom was absorbed in his bride. So this is 19th century Russia, right? The wolves were bad that winter, and everyone knew it. Yet when they heard the first wolf cry, the drivers were not much alarmed. They had too much good food and drink inside them. The first howls were taken up and echoed, and with quickening repetitions. The wolves were coming together. There was no moon, and the starlight was clear on the snow. A black drove came up over the hill behind the wedding party. The wolves ran like streaks of shadow. They looked no bigger than dogs, but there were hundreds of them. Something happened to the hindmost sledge. The driver lost control. He's probably very drunk. The horses left the road. The sledge was caught in a clump of trees and overturned. The occupants rolled out over the snow, and the fleetest of the wolves sprang upon them. The shrieks that followed made everybody sober. The drivers stood up and lashed their horses. The groom had the best team, and his sledge was lightest. All the others carried from 6 to a dozen people. Another driver lost control. The screams of the horses were more terrible to hear than the cries of the men and women. Nothing seemed to check the wolves. It was hard to tell what was happening in the rear. The people who were falling behind shrieked as piteously as those who were already lost. The little bride hid her face on the groom's shoulder and sobbed. Pavel sat still and watched his horses. The road was clear and white, and the groom's 3 blacks went like the wind. It was only necessary to be calm and to guide them carefully. At length, as they breasted a long hill, Peter rose cautiously and looked back. "There are only 3 sledges left," he whispered. "And the wolves?" Pavel asked. Enough for all of us." Pavel reached the brow of the hill, but only 2 sledges followed him down the other side. In that moment on the hilltop, they saw behind them a whirling black group on the snow. Presently the groom screamed. He saw his father's sledge overturned with his mother and sisters. He sprang up as if he meant to jump, but the girl shrieked and held him back. It was even then too late. The black ground shadows were already crowding over the heap in the road, and one horse ran out across the fields, his harness hanging to him, wolves at his heels. But the groom's movement had given Pavel an idea. They were within a few miles of their village now. The only sledge left out of 6 was not very far behind them, and Pavel's middle horse was failing. Beside a frozen pond, something happened to the other sledge. Peter saw it plainly. 3 big wolves got abreast of the horses, and the horses went crazy. They tried to jump over each other, got tangled up in the harness, and overturned the sledge. When the shrieking behind them died away, Pavel realized that he was alone upon the familiar road. "They still come?" he asked Peter. "Yes." "How many?" 20, 30, enough." Now his middle horse was being almost dragged by the other 2. Pavel gave Peter the reins and stepped carefully into the back of the sledge. He called to the groom that they must lighten, and he pointed to the bride. The young man cursed him and held her tighter. Pavel tried to drag her away. In the struggle, the groom rose. Pavel knocked him over the side of the sledge and threw the girl after him. He said he never remembered exactly how he did it or what happened afterward. Peter, crouching in the front seat, saw nothing. The first thing either of them noticed was a new sound that broke into the clear air, louder than they had ever heard it before. The bell of the monastery of their own village, ringing for early prayers.
That's messed up.
That's seriously messed up. And that's why Pavel and Peter are in America. How I Met Your Mother, you know?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and Willa Cather, she took many of her stories by talking to the locals, these immigrants that had come over to America.
Yeah.
From Norway and from Sweden and from Russia. So this might have been an actual story that somebody...
It's very likely.
And if that's the case, we're talking 19th century, you know?
Yeah.
A pack of 100 wolves attacking...
Ground shadows.
Yeah.
It's the best. They're just doing that again,
Yeah.
that kenning.
Yeah. And I've heard people say things like, you know, Tolkien is opinionated. You know, Tolkien is he's bigoted against this or that or the other, races of people or animals, whatever.
That's entirely fabricated.
Entirely fabricated. Fact check says false.
Yeah.
You know, if he lived through South African life in the 19th century, and he lived through early English life in the early 20th century, and he lived through that period in between the wars. He saw, and he lived through the war itself, he saw far more than people, I think, today experience. And one of the things I think saw very directly was how nature is not always sweet and kind. You know, nature is not always sweet and kind to humans. The universe provides, like I said, but it doesn't always provide things for us.
Right.
So, yeah. I think our fear, our terror at wolves is deeply ingrained. And then there's the other hand, eagles, right?
Right.
Why are eagles that imagery of salvation, as you pointed out? Yeah.
And Tolkien is quick to point, and like many things, especially in what the next chapter when we meet Beorn, it's not so it's not so simple as to say there's the tame things and the wild things, and wild things are dangerous, tame things are safe.
Right.
Tame things could lead to your damnation. We ultimately see, you know, the tame going sour in Lord of the Rings, right? When Sharky and his crew get there, they ruin the Shire. But wild things can be good, though not tame. So the eagles, the very eagles that save them, Tolkien introduces the eagles as, you know, he says, here they were, there were some eagles up in the air. Now, by the way, eagles are not kindly birds.
Yes.
Some are cowardly and cruel. But the ancient race of the Northern Mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. Right? They're not kindly. They're not bourgeois at all. But they're divine. They're noble. They represent nobility and the divinity, right? This is what sits atop the world tree. This is what sits atop the crests and stem of countless royal families and houses. You know, there's somehow that link to that highest.
Yes. And
of course, they would draw these guys out of the fire.
Yeah.
They literally draw them out from the fire as the tree is about to explode. If you've ever seen a pine tree on fire, those things can shoot like a bomb.
Yeah, and right when Gandalf himself is going to jump down amidst the spears and give some sort of pagan death, they say him.
Yeah.
So whatever this power or force is that they seem to represent, it is not tame. It,
right.
Perhaps you could say focused or controlled, but it's not tame. It reminds me a lot of what Jordan Peterson talks about all the time, about how to be an adult, you have to focus that power of strength, that ferocity that's within us, to make it at the service of civilization. You can't just be, as you said, bourgeois. You can't just be somebody who sits around on a sofa all day clicking buttons. There has to be some...
Or even concerned about your business.
Yeah, right.
You know,
you
have to be invested in the world in a real way,
a
meaningful way, in the real world, not just in driving technology and money.
Yeah. Huh. I like the, you know, the eagle as a symbol. I like the way that the eagle shows up too. You have the, of course, the eagle as a symbol of the Roman Empire, and other empires as well. Before that, it's a symbol of the United States, which we almost had the turkey, by the way. That's a funny story there, you know. But it's a symbol of the United States. It's that symbol of nobility and strength and power. But it's also that image of almost not aloofness, but all-seeing, like all-seeing ability, because you're high up.
Right.
That's one of the reasons
Yeah.
I think high up is so refreshing to us as humans, is because you can see more than you can when you're down in that dark valley.
Right.
Have a position of power and authority where you can actually control what's going on to some degree. And the wings themselves remind us of that angelic force that can come at any second. I've often have to point out to my students that angels don't actually have wings. I mean, it's not, that's an artistic depiction. And
Right.
wait, what? No, the wings are an artistic depiction that's taken from earlier Zoroastrian imagery, for instance, which has
Right.
imagery of the eagle. But it's taken because that image of being up on that high place is for us associated with heavenly things and being able to see farther and being able to deal with the world in a powerful but not tame and not violent way. It's the only thing which can combat the Herwargs of the world.
Right.
If you're going to fight dragons or demons, you have to make sure you have that power but not become a dragon yourself, right? As Nietzsche,
Right.
you know, when fighting the monsters, you must not become a monster yourself, but you have to have the power to fight the monsters. And that power is that power of the eagle. It's why, spoiler alert, that's why they're so important at the last battle, the 5 armies. And also at the end of Lord of the Rings, they're the creature that
Right.
flies in and saves at the last minute.
That's right.
Power. There's a great poem, if I can share this great poem. You know the one by Tennyson, right?
Which,
Let me find it real quick. I used to have a book called All the Silver Pennies, and it had all these little poems in it, like Robert Louis Stevenson.
oh, cool.
It was awesome. It was a great book. I think I colored it with a crayon, so it's, you know, it's got all childish scribbles all over it. And I remember in particular the very short poem by Tennyson called "The Eagle," and this is sometime around late 18th century or 19th century, late 19th century. The eagle. He clasps the crag with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands. Ringed with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. It's great. It's like the, you know, the stooping of that awesome image that Tennyson brings up.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I think Tolkien really latches onto something here. It's not just a cute scene of Bilbo being funny or comical. It's that Bilbo is that little furry creature. He's the Ratatosk, and he's caught between these two forces. The force that wants to drag him down and burn him, and the force that wants to liberate him and help him and get him out of it all. I remember that in the essay, The Serpent and the Eagle, I think it was Robert Fagles maybe wrote that. I'll have to look it up. But in The Serpent and the Eagle, he talks about how this image goes way back. He's dealing with the Aristeia by Aeschylus. And he talks about how even in the Aristeia, they have that imagery of reason and thought and goodness, combating the serpentine qualities of desire and chaos and lawlessness and dragon imagery, right? And the two, when united together, can create a new thing, which is a human being, a full human. But that they are not friendly with each other. You know, the one has to dominate the other. And like Plato points out, you know, the reason or the mind, the nous, really has to be the thing that controls that power of thumotic, desiring power, whatever you want to call it, of the serpent.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're sunk, you know, you get burned alive or consumed in the flames.
Right.
Yeah, good stuff. Let me ask a question here, and we'll finish up here in a few minutes, but let me ask a question. What do you think of Gandalf in this section? I'm really always amazed at Gandalf here. You see bits during the story of the character of Gandalf but he's not an omniscient character, and he's not an omnipotent character either. And here he seems very much out of his element, even for the.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, all of a sudden, Gandalf the wise, Gandalf the wizard, their guide, they're infallible. Geez, it'd be really nice to have a wizard right now because they can do everything, you know?
Yeah.
And he comes in and he saves them from the goblins, right? They're about to be God knows what sort of, torture in the mines to be set to. And he gets the light out and then he goes and he slays the great goblin.
Yeah.
He's just a flashing sword. And now here all of a sudden he's faced with the wolves, with the hero bane, right? With these.
Yeah.
And he's climbing up a tree. So you've got a wizard on a stick. He's up at the top.
Minnesota State Fair, right?
Right, ready to be fried. And, the goblins gather around. They pile fuel under there. They light the fire. And they say 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Funny little birds. They had no wings. These guys are totally impotent. Gandalf, right along with the rest of them.
Yeah.
Each one of them is staring death. And like you said, just before Gandalf was about to go hurtling down like a thunderbolt and just kamikaze, death of glory to take out as many wolves as he can with him. The eagle, Lord of the Eagles, comes in, swoops and grabs him up just at that moment.
Yes. Which
and it seems like his paradigm has totally changed at that time, at that moment. What must Gandalf be thinking right there? Because especially if we want to compare this to later on in the Legendary, when we see with Denethor choosing such a death for himself.
Oh yeah, right. Good comparison.
And so here's Gandalf, presumably about, and it's not explicitly stated. Tolkien, the author himself, even tells us, presumably, that would have been the end of him. He probably would have killed, all these others. He was, he probably was going to hurtle himself down like a thunderbolt, but he never leaped. The eagle snatched him. So we don't know that for sure Gandalf was premeditating this, but we're watching as an outsider, saying this is probably what he's going to do. What must be going through Gandalf's mind at this moment? What does it mean to be a wizard totally out of your reckoning, totally out of your element?
Yeah, and along that line of thinking, I always think, well, Gandalf, what was your plan? I mean, did you not think through? You knew they were going to come after you, and yet you're leading down, and you come to a glen. You're like, hey, let's walk into the middle of this glen. Well, that's a good idea because the wargs would never go there, and then after that, when they do come, it's like climb that tree. That's your plan,
It's like climb a tree.
That's your plan, get her. So that by the time we get to the point where he's going to jump down, there's a whole series of things where Gandalf's biggest solution is to throw grenades at them. There's no
right
for him. And
taunt them and throw fireballs at them.
I know.
Holy hand grenade of Antioch.
Yeah, right. The hand grenade of Numenor. I know that as a literary writer, you have to get to the point where you can bring in the eagles, and that this is sort of a device to get there. But it's really intriguing to me, the character, and maybe. Well, let me finish the thought. It's really intriguing to me, the character of Gandalf and the way that he is really quite limited, especially here. I don't recall seeing this kind of limitation anywhere else in the stories. The only closest thing I can think of is with the Balrog, but that's understandable because it's a
Balrog.
It's a Balrog, for crying out loud. But you don't have this kind of almost incompetence on the part of Gandalf happening anywhere in the story. So I get it that he's supposed to do this for moving the story forward, but on the other hand, wow, why this level? Is it possible that, well, I do know one of the effects is that when you read it, you're thinking, I've been in that situation. I have been in situations where I'm up a fir tree and everything's on fire and I don't know what to do, and it's almost 3:00 in the afternoon. And
right.
Your solution, maybe I'm just going to jump them down among the pens of my critics. And so there's an identity you can have with Gandalf. You can certainly see that he's a character that makes him far more likable and closer to our heart because of this.
In some ways, it's almost as though we must identify with Gandalf at this particular moment because we're no longer. We're told about Bilbo. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes. He could feel the heat of the flames, and all of a sudden the focus is on Gandalf.
Yeah,
we're with Gandalf now. We're in Gandalf's tree.
Yeah, right.
And it's almost, I mean, he could just as easily say, well, what would you have done in his
Yeah, right.
circumstances? And it would fit perfectly well in the story.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You ever been up a tree when it's on fire? Um,
Yeah.
and I often wonder too. This may be overthinking the whole thing, but I often wonder too whether or not experiences like this on the part of Gandalf are what make him more resilient to the pull of Mordor. Because I don't know if Saruman ever leaves Orthanc. I don't. Maybe he goes out to wander around and terrorize dwarves and men under the trees. I don't know.
But you don't ever see Saruman as a kind of person who puts himself at risk.
Oh no,
He's never going to be in a risky situation like
no, 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 no. He is a pure academic. He is in those ivory walls of Harvard, and he's never leaving. He's got tenure, baby.
that.
There's never the possibility of him cleaning out a sewer or dealing with some cardiac arrest suddenly or anything like that. He's
Right.
a guy who he doesn't experience the suffering that most people endure. And I think because of that, on the one hand, there's a sort of with Saruman, there's a prurient desire to dip into the sick pleasures of smoking, these weird things that he does. I mean, it's weird, not to get ahead of ourselves too much, but doesn't it strike you as weird in Lord of the Rings that Saruman has got barrels of tobacco that he's storing away there in Orthanc. That's weird, man. Like kilo and stop there or something. But
Barrels?
Barrels of this? Yeah, the hobbits even say that he's squirreled away all this stuff from Longfire.
All the best. Yeah.
So Saruman has this prurient desire to dabble in I can't stand this. I keep having these flashes to our modern day. How, can I just be political for a minute? How elites frequently are like slumming, they go down and they have a corn dog or something, suddenly they're one with the common man. It's kind of like that. It's like Saruman's one with the common man because, hey, I spoke too, you and I were both workers. You have no idea. You were never up a tree when it's on fire. You were never caught underground being chased by goblins. You never fell down a pit with a gigantic, demon on top of you.
Right.
What the heck have you?
What have you ever done with your life?
And there are other things that Gandalf does, which I find very endearing. He loses his temper occasionally. He makes fireworks. He as it says at one point, he eats the most, he laughs the most, he talks the most.
Right.
Gandalf's character, as a character, is far more identifiable. He's far more enjoyable. He's far more human.
He's like the most fully human of any of the characters.
Yes, he is.
In The Hobbit.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
In the sense of like just everything he does. Like you said, he eats the most, jokes the most, laughs the most. There it is.
And yet he's an Istari, right? He's one of the that's come to Earth.
Yeah.
Taken. So it may be that a scene like this is perfectly placed, and I like to say that, because I give credit to Tolkien's genius, perfectly placed because it shows us not only that connection between those wolves and the eagles, but it furthers the plot, but it also shows us something about Gandalf. He doesn't always have the answers. He's not always in power. And sometimes he makes such a big mistake that he's on the brink of throwing himself down among the spears. Right.
Here he is suspended between heaven and earth.
Yeah. Good old,
like an accursed criminal.
Yeah. Good old Gandalf. Wow. That's a neat thing. Do we need to talk about the ring at all? Because I find, we still have evidence of the ring at the beginning of this when Bilbo shows up and he tries to trick the dwarves, right?
That's right. And this is where we get the two versions, the two manuscript versions between how Tolkien wove in from within the story into the context of our world, the weaving together the two manuscript traditions that in our time actually evolved to be written into the story itself.
Okay.
The story that Bilbo told them was this original version. It was much tamer. He won it in a contest, and Gollum showed him the way out.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how he tells it to the dwarves. How did you get out? How did you sneak past? He doesn't say anything about the ring yet, but he doesn't reveal that until later, I think, right?
Yeah, right. And in his character, why does he do that? I mean, is it just pride? Is it just or I mean, again, it's understandable. Here he is a grocer. He doesn't want to be thought of as a grocer. This gives him the opportunity to be Mr. Cool. And now Now he's getting his finger caught in it, so to speak, right? Because
Yeah.
now it's like those teenage movies where they tell a lie and then they have to backpedal, you know. Oh, I didn't really kiss her or whatever it was. It's
Right.
the thing, you know. I didn't really escape. It was the ring. um,
Right.
that's
Yeah. Oh, you had a magic ring that made you invisible. Well, okay, whatever. Anybody can get out that way.
yeah, right. You know, if you had lasers too, you would have won the Civil War. But yeah, it's funny to me that Bilbo has this thing. Well, I'll tell. I just won't tell them about the ring. Not just yet. You know, not yeah.
Not just yet. Yeah.
Which
And he comes in.
yeah.
He steals in among them as they're bickering.
Oh yeah.
You know, Gandalf and Dory are like, you know, Dory, would you ever drop him for? Dory says, you would drop him. He said, you'd have dropped him if a goblin suddenly grabbed your legs from behind. Well, good heavens, why didn't you pick him up again?
Yeah.
You didn't pick him up. You're swinging that sword willy-nilly. Somebody's going to lose their head.
Love that description.
Just go back and forth. And they're about to what? Knife each other or something? I mean, we know how these conversations go. You know, we've all been on the playground.
Right.
After a game of kickball and things didn't go well. And all of a sudden Bilbo pops in, takes off the ring and says, and here's the burglar.
Yep. Ta-da!
And bless me how they jumped.
Yeah. Which is exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, can I say two things about that? One is
Yeah.
the description on the part of Dory of the battle is priceless. You know, I love it, in more in detail is this. Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark, everybody falling over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped off my head with Glamdring, and Thorin was stabbing here, there, and everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden, you gave one of your blinding flashes. We saw the goblins running back, yelping. You shouted, "Follow me, everybody!" And everybody ought to have followed. It's a priceless description. And again, not to bash a movie producer or a movie creator, but to show that depletes all the joy of it. It's like if you hear it from the mouth of Dory, there's that element of you're making it up, or that's how you saw it, or you the character of Dory as being just damn frustrated. He's had to run and chase and all. And so there's all these elements of comedy going on in the retelling of the story. But when you see it, oh yeah, there's chopping of this and that and goblins everywhere. Okay, great, got it. You know, and it just flat thing. As it is, Dory becomes this guy he's just you know, hey, I was doing the best I could do. You know, what do you expect from? What are you, a wizard? Come on. and contrary to that also is Gandalf losing his temper with these guys. You know, you're like 13 incompetent fools, and I gave you a treasure and you lost it. What the heck? You know, can't get good help these days at all.
Right.
But at the same time, you have Bilbo hearing their conversation about him, which is what we all kind of want to some degree. I think everybody wants to overhear what other people think about them when they're not coerced by our presence, right?
Right.
Because then we think we get a more honest vision of who we are. And so Bilbo, visibility, he gets a moment where he hears, wow, I am actually valuable to them. They do actually care about me. I'm not just a grocer to them. The wizard says, I feel responsible for him. You shouldn't have lost him, right? And then the other door's like, he's been more trouble than he's worth. So you hear this, like, some doors like him, some don't. And I think that's important because Bilbo is, part of the story is about Bilbo understanding who he is. Coming to who he is. And we find out who we are partly through the opinions of others. Right?
Yeah. Right. He's just emerged from the cave out into the sunshine.
Yeah.
And here he has retold the narrative of who he is.
Yes. Yes.
At this present moment to this group of people right now.
And so now he can reinvent himself, so to speak.
Yeah.
I am not just the grocer. I'm the guy who can appear and disappear and escape. And, and I think he transforms that knowledge of himself into riddles later on that protect him from the dragon, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then finally in this conversation, just to conclude this, that, like you mentioned, Tolkien writes in this bit about the ring later on, from what I understand. And they kind of ask him, well, what about the guards? You know, and they kind of probe that whole business, trying to find out about the ring. But then I had thought, I don't know why, I had thought that this next bit was only in the movie version, and it actually is in the text. Gandalf says,
So,
"What did I tell you? Mr. Baggins is more about you than you guess." Okay, and then he
yeah.
says he gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this.
Yeah.
Hobbit wondered if he guessed at the part of his tale that he had left out. Now, I thought
Right.
that was somehow not in the book, that was invented. And I'm not talking the Jackson version, by the way. I'm talking about the Rankin Bass, because that's what I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
I think Gandalf says something like, "It has the ring of truth." Yes, it rings true, I think is the dialogue that he says.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't know. I guess in the book, it really does exist that Gandalf is like, "Mr. Baggins is more than you can guess," doesn't he?
Yeah.
You know, and he looks at Bilbo with that like,
We'll talk later.
"Hide behind your back, boy.
Yes. What does it have in its pockets,
Right.
is after all.
Your dad."
Mm-hmm.
And it does highlight to a certain degree an element which I think is continuing throughout the story, which is the development of the ring. Bilbo is becoming more furtive, hiding things more than he did before,
Right.
and relying on the ring. So it puts him in
Yeah.
a spot later on, certainly, but it also has that challenge of dragging him into that dark shadow world that we see.
Right.
So, well, that's pretty good stuff. That's almost
Yeah. I'd say so. There's just one last thing I want to mention with this, because this closes the gap on the passing through the great border of the mountains between leading up to the adventure and the adventure, right? As we talked about, there's a dividing line of the Misty Mountains, the spine of the serpent on the map. And Bilbo has passed through that. And as they entered into it, we got a goblin song. And here it's being, actually, we've just gone down this chasm where we started with a song by the elves.
Right.
Actually, really a song by the dwarves, then a song by the elves. Then we got a song by the goblins. You know, whip, snap, crack, down they go to Goblin Town, yo ho, my lad. And then as soon as Bilbo emerges on the other side, night falls again, and they get the 15 birds in 5 fir trees. You know, bake 'em, toast 'em, fry 'em, roast 'em till beards blaze and eyes glaze, and all the nasty things that come with burning flesh. And they sing this, yahoy, yaharry, hey, yahoy. And that, you've got these bookends to the pivotal moment down in the dark depths, with the ring, with the golem, with the shadow cell down there. And so now we've got the A and the A prime of the goblin song. So we should be looking for the dwarf song, and then ultimately the elf song again.
Yeah. No,
the Rivendell elf song.
That's a really good point. Okay, so we'll keep an eye out for that. They had a really neat program on the Amlin Sewell podcast. I think it might have been the Rivendell one that they did, where they talked about the poetry of Tolkien in that chat.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of mystified by it, because when you read it just as words, it doesn't look like good poetry. I'll put it that way.
Right.
Mm-hmm. You know, he's not Lord Byron. And yet they played a band singing the tune, you know, that the elves sing, the Hey Lolly Lolly. And it got me thinking about this. The band played it in a style that was more like an Appalachian music style.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this window opened to me. Tolkien wasn't writing great structured poetry like Shakespeare or Donne or he was writing in a colloquial style from the medieval ages that he was familiar with.
Yeah.
That was really
that fits. That's what it reads like.
The Hey Nani Nani is like a troubadour song. This and the other goblin song, these are sea shanties.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
And so, Cameron, gird your loins. I'm going to actually try to do a recording of this. I've already set the one to music, and I'm going to set this one to music too, and I'll see if I can't do a recording. I'll share it with you. But when you suddenly as a sea shanty, you're like, oh, that makes a hell of a lot of sense, you know. But he couldn't. I don't think Tolkien could write music, so he couldn't write the actual notes down. But he had that. He was thinking.
Got it here.
But I think you're right too, that because he was so structured in his imagination, he was creating what's the term for bookend? The Greek term for bookend. Uh, it'll come to me when
Yeah, it's like right here.
it'll come to me when I don't need it. He was making those in order to
Yes.
create a highlight or a frame around this very, very central part of the goblins and of Gollum, and then of the trees, the eagles and
Yep.
bulls, because those three things go together: goblins, Gollum, wargs, and eagles. And as you said,
Yeah.
it's like a resurrection image. It's like it being drawn out. Chiasmus. Sorry,
Yes.
it's a chiasmus. Okay.
Yeah.
You have on the one hand the chiasm of the song of the elves, and then the song of the goblins, and then you have the goblins, and then we'll see if there's another elf thing too. But they are definitely bookending. It does raise a question though, because what are we right now? This is chapter 6. Okay.
Yes.
And that's chapter 6 out of 19 chapters.
Yeah.
Okay. So why would this very important thing be put 1/3 through the book? Because we still have 2/3 of a book to go.
Right. Well,
I don't have an answer for that, really.
just looking at the numbering, it's in chapter 12 that Bilbo goes down into the lair of the dragon. So we're halfway to that point.
Oh, it's true. It's true. Yes.
Inside information. Now is the time for esteemed Mr. Baggins, who has so on and so forth in foreign style,
Yeah.
to do his part.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's very intriguing.
I think that's probably why this is here.
Let me suggest something else that just came to mind when you said that.
Okay.
If we look at it as 1/3 of the novel, isn't it also a 1-to-2 relationship? Right?
It is. It's the not quite 2/3. It's the golden ratio.
The golden ratio.
That's awesome. Put on that psychedelic screen stuff you had there.
Now, I have no confirmation of this, but I know Tolkien knew about esoteric geometry. I know he dabbled in it.
Sure.
I know that he tried to employ it in different places. Is it possible that he was doing this ancient thing that you see in works like Plato and Boethius and others, where they would construct their work based upon that mathematical principle? Mine completely fried when I read about the Gospel of John, he was a Pythagorean, John was, and that the central part of John's Gospel is Jesus wept. There are an equal number of words on one side of the Gospel as there are on the other in Greek.
Really? Wow.
Imagine that attention to detail, that ability to craft something to that level of perfection.
Yeah.
It's almost I don't want to say that word.
Inconceivable. You keep using that word.
Inconceivable. It's almost inconceivable for us that we would have somebody with that level of craftsmanship. But it's not impossible.
No.
Not impossible. You see it in musicians, and you see it in the plastic arts. It's possible.
Yeah.
Wordsmith could have the level of craftsmanship that he planned out every single word.
Single word in the gospel.
Yeah.
And why not?
And why not?
I mean, that's.
If you want to.
It's like any other craft.
So.
It's just. Word lore is lost to us these days to be able to craft such a thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. What you just said. That's true. Word lore is lost to us as a common thing. There are people who still can do it, but they are not the most prominent on the scene right now. And I can't help but think, again, with Tolkien's genius, I can't help but think that this is intentional. Because look, this is something I have to point out to my students over and over again, and you know this. When you're an artist, you have control over the art. You are not Jackson Pollock, just, spraying stuff.
Right.
And so you could put the Gollum section halfway through or 2/3 through. Hell, you could have put it at the end of the novel, and that's it.
Right.
But he doesn't. He intentionally makes it so it's right there at that point in the story, in the journey.
And especially if this becomes such a because he had the chance to rework it,
Yeah.
right? And he did. He edited that chapter to make it more consonant with the later Lord of the Rings, but he didn't move the chapter. He could have.
No.
Even there, he doubles down on its position, its location.
Yeah.
Especially given the pivotal importance that this plays in the whole world and universe that he creates.
Yes.
Yep.
Right. God bless you.
Yeah. Back again.
Yeah, and so really, I really tend to think that we're looking at a structural pattern here, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
There's a structural pattern that is, on the one hand, repeated 6 chapters later, but it's also a structural pattern which is 1 to 2 to 3.
Yeah.
The golden ratio
Right.
portion that he intentionally puts in here. And the reason that the ancient authors did that, Plato, for instance, being the one that comes to mind, the reason they did that was, on the one hand, to emphasize a point, so that the point falls in such a degree that we see it at that specific spot. But also they did it because for them, the architecture behind the work was just as important as the work.
Right.
You know? And I would go out on a limb and say for Tolkien that was true too.
I see no reason why it wouldn't be.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, good stuff. Wow.
Well, that's very cool. Well, we have talked a lot of great stuff here today.
You know, we always do. It's great talking with you.
Made some discoveries.
Very refreshing. I'm going to be posting something on this movie, The Wave, that I mentioned to you, and I'll certainly send you any requests I do. If you are creating anything, please send it my way. I'd love to see what you're doing with your projects right now and your chivalry thing. It's awesome. So keep up the good.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Yeah. Next time we get together, we'll tackle chapter 7 and queer lodging.
Queer lodgings.
But until then, I'm going to chew on this for a while because this is really some powerful stuff. So thank you, Cameron. Thank you so much.
Good.
So,
thank you, Will.
God bless you, and we'll see you in the future.
God bless you.
Head up.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Arrivederci.
Yeah, no. I wonder if people make these up or if these are bots. Does a bot make this up? Sort of an April Fool's joke. Press it and it does a weird thing. Like, that's weird. Why would you want... I don't really understand why people would want these sorts of things in their show. But yeah. Oh, yeah. Like an hour and a half of this? I could see sending people into a catatonic state. Maybe epilepsy would occur for sure. And that's all I have. I don't have anything else.